As we begin the lecture series in logic, let us begin with a prayer. Let us ask for the blessings of God, as He is the source of all wisdom. Lord, we request you to accompany us by enabling our minds to be exclusively open and attentive to what is taught in the class, so that we are able to gather the maximum from the classes rather than keeping them for later period. Help us, Lord, in our endeavor. So we are beginning today with the classes on logic. We take the first unit, language and terms. The first part of this first unit is more of an introduction, but they are very important for us to understand logic as we go deeper into logic. The notes that I have prepared is rather elaborate, although it may not be very clear to you since you are not accustomed to the language. But then with the explanation, normally things must be clear, provided each one comes prepared. Read ahead and come, then it is a refreshing of what you have vaguely understood. That vagueness will be clarified in the process of explanation. We start with the referring to the logic that we are teaching is based on the philosophy of Aristotle. And Aristotle we have studied, and contemporary and modern philosophers have developed various disciplines of philosophy, but the only discipline that is universally accepted, not only in the West but also in the East, is Aristotle's logic. So far, nobody was able to find fault with the logic that he has developed. He is the master of logic, and he has developed that one in his book called Organon. Logic is the science of reasoning. That is just a working definition. We will go little deeper into that one. But before that, there is logic also in Indian philosophy. Every philosophy has got a logic, but there is no one word to refer to the Western understanding of logic. So therefore, I have given a few different terms that are more or less equivalent to the Western understanding of logic. They are Nyaya, that is reasoning or argumentation; Tarka Shastra. Now we are to write with the diacritical signs. Nyaya. So it is written this one. So it is prolonged. Then Tarka Shastra. It is Sha sound. Therefore, it is Tarka Shastra. Then Vada Vidya. And then there is a Pramana Shastra. So Pramana. Therefore, you have already introduced to the diacritical marks. So it is pronounced as Na. Therefore, there is a dot under N. Pramana Shastra. Visha Shastra. So these are a few of the terms that are used as equivalent, not more or less equivalent to what is meant by logic in the West. That is only just to give a connection to the Indian logic. And you will be in Nyaya philosophy, you will be going, because Nyaya philosophy is exclusively devoted to logic, but the different type of logic. Reasoning belongs essentially to human as rational. Human being is defined as rational animal. That means we are only rational. And only one who is rational can reason. The animals cannot carry out reasoning. Because why? Because they are not rational. So only rational animals, rational beings only can reason. So we are given the gift of reasoning. But that doesn't mean that all the reasoning that we carry out is always the correct reasoning. We do it in our day-to-day life. We give arguments, but oftentimes those arguments are not always correct. That is the reason why we need to study the techniques of reasoning. Everyone walks, everyone sings, everyone draws. But when we know the techniques of dancing, techniques of singing, we sing it better. So also, the study of logic is meant for that one. Not that we do not know reasoning, but only to make it clear whether and how we can make our reasoning in the correct way. So, that is the reason why logic is introduced, the importance of logic. So just because we cannot take for granted, just because we are rational, it doesn't mean that all that we do is reasoning. We can and we do make mistake. Therefore, it is good that we learn the correct reasoning and to show the difference between a correct reasoning and the incorrect reasoning. With this few thoughts of introduction, we are going to give a few introductory clarifications. I am giving one by one so that things are clear. The first point is starting with a working definition, because we are going to study logic, but then before we start studying logic, some sort of something to start with. That is called a working definition. And that working definition of logic is a practical science of valid reasoning. A practical science of valid reasoning. I will take the different phrases that are used. It is a practical science. Why it is called a practical science? Because it is both science and art. So that I clarify first. It is a science and it is an art. Both. And both together we say in one phrase, practical science. Instead of saying it is science as well as art, we use one expression, practical science. Now, what is meant by practical science? For that, what is science? Science teaches us to know something. To know. Science is concerned about the theory. It is feeding our intellect. It is enabling us to understand. Knowing the techniques of dancing, the techniques of music, the techniques of swimming. That is knowledge. Theoretically, I know how to swim. But that is different from the act of swimming, the act of dancing, the act of singing, or anything for that matter. So logic is not merely just giving theory, the principles, but it is also enabling us, it is also helping us to carry out the act of reasoning. Not only teaching what reasoning is, then after having studied logic, we would have remained persons without any logic. Therefore, that is the reason these two aspects are taken care of. Theory is given, and along with the theory, practice also is given. Therefore, it is called a practical science. I given science teaches us to know something, art teaches us to do something. The art of painting is different from the science of painting. Logic is both science and art, in other words, a practical science, since it imparts knowledge of the principles of correct reasoning and practical know-how of reasoning as well. Both. It gives the principles, that is the theory. At the same time, the know-how, how to do it, and give examples and do it. Exercises are there. Therefore, we get into action as well, not only theory. Therefore, it is a practical science. Then there is another phrase that is used in the working definition, namely a practical science of valid reasoning. Now, the expression, we already used that one several times, and we have used in our day-to-day conversation. What is reasoning? Reasoning refers to the process of passing from something known to something unknown. Something is known, and from this I am arriving at something that is unknown. I am able to arrive at from the known to the unknown because of the reasoning. We will give examples later, but this only just preparing the ground. So from known to the unknown. And the known diamond, what is given to us, we know for certain, and we are convinced of what is given. What is given is called premises. And what is not given, and that means to which I arrive at, that is called conclusion. Premises and conclusion. Now, let me give a classical example which will be repeated several times over and over again. That is the example given by Aristotle himself. So, all men are mortal. Peter is a man. Therefore, Peter is mortal. Now, what is given here? These two are given. These two we know for certain. All men are mortal. I know for certain. I have no doubt. And I also know Peter is a man. From these two known facts, I am able to arrive at by reasoning. Then, if that is so, then Peter is mortal. So this is the conclusion. They are the premises. Premises. That which is given, or those which are given, are the premises, and that to which we conclude, or that which is arrived at as from the premises, that is called the conclusion. So, reasoning enables us to move from what is given or what is known to the what is not given or what is unknown. That process of moving from the known to the unknown, that is called reasoning process. So by reasoning, we are able to do that one. Now how to do it? All those things we are going to learn later. So thus, an argument consists of propositions of which one is conclusion and the others are premises. So we have already given a short example or an example for an argument. One is conclusion. We are arriving at that one. From where? From two premises. The premises in the Aristotelian logic, as we learn, we will be using only the minimum required. At least two must be there. At least two premises. There can be more. That you will study more in symbolic logic. So at least two premises should be there, and from those premises we are arriving at the conclusion that Peter is mortal. Peter is mortal. Now we use the expression premises and conclusion. Just a little clarification, but which will be clarified later, but still a little clarification would be in place. Premises and conclusion, they are relative terms. They are relative terms. What are relative terms? The terms, the meaning of which is arrived at in relation to some other term. Example may clarify. We will be taking it up later. For example, let me give an example that will be better. Creator and creature, they are relative terms. Why? Someone is a creator in relation to a creature. If there is no creature, there is no creator. Husband and wife, they are relative terms. Someone is husband. Rama is not a husband. Rama is husband only in so far as he has a wife. So also here, if I simply give you the sentence, Peter is mortal, what is that? You will not be able to answer whether it is premise or conclusion. It is a conclusion only in relation to the premises. Insofar as all men are mortal, Peter is a man. In relation to them, in relation to these premises, Peter is mortal is a conclusion. So, looking at the shape of the proposition, we will not be able to understand whether it is a premise or a conclusion. It can be a premise, it can be a conclusion. In relation to each other, a sentence or a proposition becomes premise or conclusion. So just as in relation to a creature, someone is a creator. In relation to someone who is an employer, another person is an employee. So we can give several examples of this. So they are called relative terms. This question will come up again when you come to the question of terms. But then since we refer to the expressions, premises and conclusion, we are just saying they are relative terms. So not because always Peter is mortal is not going to be conclusion. Peter is mortal only insofar as the other two are premises. And these are premises only insofar as Peter is mortal is a conclusion. So mutually, in relation to each other, one becomes the other. The meaning of one becomes clarified in relation to the other. So husband and examples are given, husband and wife, employer and employee, and so on. Now, how to make out which is conclusion and which are premises? From the function they perform, we can make out. It is not necessary that the conclusion is given last. The last proposition is not necessarily the conclusion. Not necessarily. We have to understand what function does it perform. And from that function, we must be able to make out. So for example, here, looking at the three propositions that are given, all men are mortal, Peter is man, Peter is mortal. So this is the conclusion. It is a conclusion. Besides, if you are not able to understand which is the conclusion, sometimes some indicators are there, but they are not the important one. As logicians, From the context, we must be able to find out what is the conclusion, what is the premise. Now, for instance, instead of giving this as the last one, I can very well say, Peter is mortal because all men are mortal and Peter is a man. They are placed second, they are placed later. So the conclusion can be anywhere. But then we have to understand the meaning from the context, from the function they perform, we are able to find out whether the given propositions are premises or conclusion. So some of the indicators that are given there, that is only may help us. And therefore, before a proposition, therefore Peter is mortal, naturally is an indication that it must be conclusion. Hence, if we use instead of therefore, if we use hence, that also a sign that it is a conclusion. Or thus, so accordingly, it follows that, it implies that, it means that. So these are all different ways of presenting the conclusion. That will help us also, that can also help us to understand which is the conclusion. So also for the premises, there are indicators. Since all men are mortal and Peter is a man, Peter is mortal. So because of these factors, I am able to arrive at this conclusion. So since other indicators are because, as I already started, because all men are mortal and Peter is a man, Peter is mortal. It follows because as follows from, as shown by, derived from, deduced from, and so on. Only to give you some helpful factors to understand which is conclusion and which is premise. But the best way to understand is look at the context, and from that one, what type of function a particular proposition is carrying out, then we are able to make out whether it is a conclusion or it is a premise. So this is along with the working definition of logic, a practical science of valid reasoning. So practical science because it is both science and art. Science because it teaches to know something. And that is an art insofar as it teaches us to do something. How to do the practice, therefore is a practical science. Then coming to is a valid reasoning. So that main term is reasoning. Reasoning is a process of moving from the known to the unknown, from the given to the not given. That process, how to jump from here to this one, that process is called reasoning. And what is given, they are termed as premises. What is not given, or where we are arriving at, that is called the conclusion. And they are relative terms. So these are the few points I give under the clarification number 1.